Hi guys, and welcome back to episode number 52 of the PT Education Podcast. We are back in the game, consistent, weekly, here as always, me and Dan Green, and a special guest, which we'll talk about in a second. So I'm excited, but actually I feel a bit more relaxed, a bit more chilled, probably thanks to our guest. He's already chilled me out and relaxed me and put me in a calm place.
Yeah, won't last, will it, mate?
No mate, I will go excitable as we go, it's guaranteed. But before I do get excitable, how are you today, mate?
I'm good, mate. I'm good.
Not that I don't know if anyone listening really gives a shit, but it's just so I get.
They're going to get fucking told, aren't
They're
they?
going to get told about you and your life and what's going
Big
on.
weekend. Man United are in a cup final. We talk about football a lot on it.
Yeah.
Man United are in a cup
Big
final.
night tonight.
Big night tonight, mate. Barcelona. I fancy us to win. Fucking hell, Stan. I fancy us to win both, but I also said I fancy England to win the fucking quarters last time. We had that. So it's a good weekend. Getting good cut now. All my cuts going well.
You are getting peeled,
Yeah, I feel pretty good actually.
Yeah.
It's amazing. As your calories go down, you make the more sensible decision to increase the food volume via vegetables, and you actually get loads more. Fuck me.
Dan's
Things gone already.
Dan's about his amazing cut, which will go on. And what Dan will go, James, how are you doing? I'll be like, I'm alright, thanks, mate. But yeah, no, I've got my head down with my study, with my course as always, head down with work, and I've got a French bulldog living with me at the moment, which is very excitable. He's keeping me very busy. And getting steps up, which is good. I'm enjoying getting outside more. As Dan is still fucked off, I am going to introduce our guest. We've got a PT that works at Dan's studio, Christian. Christian, how are you doing today, mate?
I'm doing very well, thank you, James. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to seeing what we delve into today, and yeah, I'm doing well. I've had a good morning. Couple of clients, couple of coffees, so I'm good to go.
That's mate. Well, thanks for being here. And we've already had a nice little chat affair, haven't we, about life and PT and all sorts. So we'll go down some different paths today. Dan's missed out. Did you want to fill in the guests on the rest of your cut?
Yeah, I do.
You do.
So what I was saying, let's fucking it's back to me.
This podcast is mainly about Dan.
The Dan Green podcast.
Can you fucking believe that timing? My point bit, only because it's relevant. If it was just like me, I wouldn't do it. But only just because it's relevant.
It's valuable.
But as you increase the food volume through the vegetables, because you get so much more for your calories, you get so much more nutrients, actually you feel so much better. And you realise that actually you try and fit in these more highly processed foods, and actually you end up hungrier and you don't feel as good. Which leads me, and this is where I'll shut the fuck up and get back into our guest, is, we've been talking about the Stephen Bartlett podcast. And he's had a few people on the Stephen Bartlett podcast recently who've maybe got some few rogue theories. Well, he's had someone on last week, I'll get the name. Is that who it was? The American guy. Yeah. He was fucking brilliant.
Yeah, I've heard him for a little while. He knows his shit when it comes to nutrition.
Yeah. So it's for everyone on here, I would massively, yes.
He's got a podcast called The Genius Life.
Thank you.
It's very good.
I would highly recommend listening to that podcast. Yeah. And I'm going to listen to this podcast. He's got a book out as well, isn't it?
Yeah, he may well do. I think his story is that his mum passed away with like Alzheimer's, and so one of his drives is like helping people improve their nutrition to better their neurological health,
right?
And their all-round well-being.
Was she a vegetarian? Is that the story?
I'm not sure.
I think she was.
It might have been. Yeah, so the whole can of worms in that one.
Yeah.
It was
nutrition plans.
Well, he's very good in it because he talks about vegan and vegetarianism, and he doesn't talk about it from a belief standpoint. It's all from a nutritional standpoint, and having the people that Stephen's had on, weirdly, the one of the things that Stephen doesn't do that maybe Joe does a bit more is he doesn't bring other conversations into current conversations.
Is it Joe Rogan?
Joe Rogan,
right.
Yeah. So when he didn't, rather than be like, when Max was talking, he didn't say, well, I've actually had someone on who said that calories don't matter in weight loss. Yeah. He never said that. But I actually quite like sometimes you bring another conversation in, going, I've heard this, what do you think about this? But nonetheless, the podcast was a really good podcast.
It's an evolving thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think Stephen's getting this sort of new.
I like his interview technique as well.
People can tell this is a podcast. We're obviously a fan of his stuff and one reason we are a fan of his stuff is because of the kind of deeper conversations that Stephen has and how he kind of connects with people and builds that depth. And from my perspective, I think you would agree that's one reason why I've got Christian on today, because from the outside, anyway, sort of seeing you as a more deeper, calmer, relaxed individual. That's how I see it. Mm-hmm. But would you agree with that, first of all? And from what I see from the outside, is that what you experience on the inside?
Yeah, I think we might have spoken about it before, and that it's very easy to perceive people a certain way from the external, but perhaps their internal reality is a little bit different or a lot different to what you're perceiving. in my case, I feel like I'm probably someone who is, for the most part, pretty level-headed, and I feel pretty calm. But also I have moments where that isn't the case, where I have, I guess, like little wobbles or moments where I don't feel quite as assured in myself, or just quite as mentally at peace. But I think what I've, I guess, learned over the last few years is different ways in which I can either overcome those moments of less inner peace and try to establish greater inner peace, or just, I guess, just through over time, through life, just learning to actually just, ride the wave of those moments and just trust that they pass given time. So overall, I'd say it's probably a fairly close interpretation and perception of how I actually feel internally, but for sure, I get that comment a fair amount, and it's definitely not always the case. People tell me it's so calm. I'm like, well, actually, no, right now I don't feel that way, But for whatever reason, perhaps I didn't come across that way.
Sometimes it's quite useful skill to be able to disassociate between how we act and behave to how we feel, because if we're always reacting to our feelings, then life would be interesting, shall we say. But then also, I suppose, like we were talking about off air, you do need the opportunity to be able to connect with how you're feeling and what you're experiencing as well.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I'm working on at present, is tapping more into my body, into my emotions, into how I really feel, rather than perhaps subconsciously not really stepping into that and not really addressing it. So a couple of weeks ago I went to a breathwork class along with Ryan Robinson, and that was a really cool experience, really powerful experience. It was an experience where you're taken out of your mind and you're really brought into your body, and then once you step into your body a little bit more, that's when stuff starts to surface and starts to come up, and emotions that perhaps you haven't really addressed start to come through. And that was just like a really interesting experience to have.
I remember you guys coming back from that class, and Ryan in particular. Had you done breathwork before that?
No.
Because I remember, was it Ryan or you saying, like, in terms of the level you got to, in terms of like seeing the lights, and is that how you explained it to me? Was that?
I did have some like visual experience with it as well. For me, the main thing was like physically, I could feel like my body like shaking and feeling the urge to move. Visually, I saw like a few patterns, and like I had like you have an eye mask on, so you can't see anything. It's like completely dark, but I could see like bright white light, and then for me there was just a real feeling of almost like just the feeling to let go and to stop being quite so hard on myself, and to allow myself just to be, it's like a feeling of like sadness was almost within me that felt like it needed to come through, and that's a pretty common experience. I think like I've been to, like, in that instance that I went with Ryan, there was a few people in that class who were in tears. I since went back a couple of weeks ago, and again, basically the whole room was full of people crying, and it's a massive emotional release. And for me, the nearest, especially in my first experience of it, it was probably the nearest experience I've had to a psychedelic experience.
Yeah. Where
I sort of lost my sense of self for a moment and just really let go. It's very powerful.
Awkward breathwork, that's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's definitely something I want to try as well, because especially with the way you both were after that class, and you explaining it, and you wanted to go again, I think it's a really interesting experience to go through. So it's... I
wonder if there's other things going on there as well around kind of creating stillness, creating space, mindfulness. I understand there's the breathing side of it. I'm just curious in your opinion, and there's a lot of other layers to this potentially, and people being able to, go back to what I was saying earlier, connect with emotions. I don't think we give ourselves in the modern world any space or time. It's something that I reflect on myself as well, about I'm currently trying to get back into a bit of meditation, just trying to give myself a bit of stillness, a bit of space, a bit of time to think about how am I feeling. I think in today's world it's really easy to be very reactive and very busy and fill our time up with stuff, and our podcast last week was trying to develop focus, and what you're talking about there is developing focus on the self, rather than me and Dan were talking about last week focusing on tasks or people or learning or study.
Yeah.
How about the focus on ourselves, which we probably didn't talk about enough last week, and I think that's what I'm hearing from you there is and something that I think you seem to be very intrinsically motivated to do, is go, how am I feeling? What's going on there? And that space and that environment seems to be incredibly therapeutic.
Yeah, I think the space is super important. I think we can all design and be the architect of our environment, of the spaces that we interact with, to give ourselves the ability to ultimately, I think, feel safe. I think that's one of the big things about the environment of the breathwork, is that you need to feel safe. Because only when you feel safe can your emotions then start to come through. If your nervous system is constantly ramped up, which like our modern sort of world does do to us with social media and the phones and notifications and work and just all the sort of the stresses that surround us all the time, your nervous system is just constantly fired up. And if that's the case, it's very hard to take a deep breath and allow what you're really feeling to come through you. And I think, like actually taking a moment, and like you said, you're getting into your meditation. For me, meditation has been something that I've been fairly consistent with for the last, 2 or 3 years, and sort of dabbled in prior to that and couldn't really find any consistency with it. But like I just recognise for me nowadays, it's so valuable for me to take a moment to slow down and to sort of get in touch with myself, because only once you do that can you then, only when you get quiet can you actually like hear yourself. If you're constantly doing and chasing and thinking, you're never really tapping into the deeper essence of yourself, and you're never really able to hear what you really feel, what you really want, and therefore you can't like direct your actions in line with the sort of person that you truly are at your core. And you're probably going to be more led by the world around you, or sort of externally led rather than internally led. So that's why I think it's actually really important to get still, like you were saying.
And I suppose for you as well, what I see is you're being able to be your authentic self, is make those decisions and adjustments and behaviours that are in line with, I suppose, your values and what you truly want. It's very hard to do that in a very reactive, busy environment. But I suppose it's not always easy to do that for a lot of people. If you're naturally more relaxed and chilled as you are, if I play devil's advocate now for a lot of people listening, and I'll put myself in this category who isn't as relaxed, that can be really fucking difficult to meditate, to find space, to be still, especially as PTs, where normally maybe quite extroverted, quite busy, doing stuff. Well, what kind of advice would you give those types of people who don't maybe naturally gravitate towards this type of stuff?
I guess like you can find different ways. Like not everybody's meditation has to be the same thing. You know, it hasn't got to be a case of like I'm going to sit down and be in silence and and just chill for 15 minutes and watch my thoughts come through and watch them pass. Like for somebody else, meditation might be going to a breathwork class, or it might be going on a run or doing something that just allows them to internally get quiet and step away from all the other stuff in their life. But yeah, I think ultimately we all have that capacity within us to be in a state of greater inner stillness. I think it's just first and foremost coming to terms with the value that it can bring to your life, because we do live in a society that sort of commends us for doing and for pushing and for growing, and it's like it can feel as though if you're not doing that, if you're taking a moment to slow down, that what you're doing isn't valuable, So I think actually it's coming to terms with the fact that maybe like slowing down could be beneficial and could help you push more down the line. If you view it that way, then it can perhaps give you the desire and the motivation to start to value it a little bit more highly and start incorporating it into your life.
It's actually what we were talking about off air, wasn't it? You asked me about how many sessions I'm doing and how many sessions I used to do. And when did it change? It changed over COVID, because there was that moment in COVID where you had to stop. Everyone had to stop. And actually, for a lot of people in our conversations with clients, maybe a lot of us have fallen back into the patterns that they were before COVID, but a lot of people found that first lockdown actually if they were in a position to be sort of relaxed, and they actually found it quite therapeutic. My fire's gone off. That's a shame.
Lovely fire.
I fucking put it back on now.
YouTube, which this will have you going.
Yeah, we're on YouTube.
Yeah, you go on YouTube. The fireplace will
resume playing. But it was that moment.
Technology, mate. It's all some fuck up with technology.
Well, we're around it, fucking.
Is there nothing ever goes
Yeah,
right?
it's halfway through as well.
Nothing ever goes right.
Absolutely.
Does it, mate?
Where's Eddie? Eddie, come and flip Netflix. Eddie, fix Netflix. It was an opportunity to stop, and I know for me personally at the start of the COVID, there was so much, you're trying to be so reactive around things that when actually the thing came from the government that you have to stop, there was actually a moment where you could just breathe, and actually there's nothing you could do, you've got to stay at home. And it really made me think about things going forward, but that ability to stop and then do less sessions enabled me to understand, well actually how do I see my career going? Because before that, it was 45 sessions a week. Actually 45 sessions a week as well, not like 45 booked in and then some dropped off. And I was just going like day to day, and I said, I've still got my study in, but I much prefer the way I coach now, and that's because I coach less, I can be more involved in the session because I can be more engaged. But it was that ability to stop that enabled me to understand that, because the question you asked, which was a very good one when we were off air, is if that hadn't come along, what would you still be doing the same thing you were before? And the answer, honestly, is probably yes. I'd still be smashing through those sessions, never taking a step back and understand what I want. So sometimes stopping, because I find we've spoken about holidays, you know, my space is walking, but especially in nature. That's when I find I'm at my most relaxed, and then my brain starts firing. Have you found that sort of when you stop, then your brain, as you said actually in quite a way, then you actually, maybe it doesn't know, it starts firing, you start listening to it.
Yeah, you can actually hear yourself.
Yeah.
You're not just scattered with ideas. Yeah, I do find that as well. Like when it comes to like putting out, I don't know, social media content or something, the more that I sit there and think, I've got to come up with an idea, I've got to think about something, I've got to make something happen and try and push it. The more I do that, either, you know, I'll struggle to come up with something, but the stuff that I do come up with is like, you can sort of tell that it's forced. Whereas if I'm like, you know what, I'm not going to try and think of a social media post, I'm just going to go out on a walk, step outside, allow my brain just to do its thing, and then naturally, you know, as I'm in a more relaxed state, better ideas will start to just sort of flow through me.
Makes sense.
You know?
Yeah.
So I think there's so much value to that, 100%.
I think the word value is a really key word. It's finding how that values you as an individual.
Yeah.
Like how does making more space and time to be still and to relax offer value? Because it's so difficult to do. And again, I'll put my hands up, I'm struggling to do it. But as I've got older, my life values change, I suppose, and I think about who I want to be, how I want to grow, how I want to develop. You're right, your default is push, push, push.
Yeah.
And actually, by taking a step back, creating space, you go, well, first of all, how do I want to push?
Yeah.
Where do I actually really want to place some energy and focus? It's something we talk a lot about on the podcast, and seeing that value to it and how it impacts your life is incredible. And I think, the older I get, the more I see that. But I suppose I'm acknowledging today, A, how difficult it is, and B, it's quite a brave thing to do. From the outside, people might go, it's fucking lazy, just take a little walk, you should be doing this, this and this. That's the messaging, as you say, Christian.
Yeah, exactly.
Society's telling you, do more, learn more. Social media is saying, all the business coaches are like, do this, 8 till 10, do this. Half an hour for break, half an hour for training, and go again. Okay, maybe that's right for that person. Maybe, who knows? I don't even know. What people say on social media to what actually really happens isn't the same.
No.
But what we're talking about here is how that really impacts you. But it's difficult to do, isn't it? Have you ever wrestled with that? Because you seem from the outside now as someone who's very cool and calm and able to make those decisions and quite happy to be authentic and to maybe not always be as busy and overwhelmed. But have you ever struggled with kind of being pushed and dragged into that busy, overwhelmed state?
No, absolutely, and I still am. Like there's times where I feel like, I should be doing more, I should be working more, I should be producing more. But then I have to sort of like step back into the awareness of mind as like, you know what? Why am I here on this earth? Is it just to constantly be working and producing and doing? Like that's probably not why as human beings we've been placed on this earth. I don't know. That's just my assumption. For some people that might be their underlying purpose. By all means, do your thing. But for me personally, to just like slave away, just constantly working and like sacrificing other things that I deeply care about, sacrificing maybe relationships and travel and experience, to me it just doesn't really make sense. Of course, we all have obligations, bills we've got to pay, things we've got to do, so you've got to, I think, strike the balance, but you've got to strike the balance that works for you, ultimately. I think ultimately it's just like you were sort of alluding to, it's really getting clear on your values and what it is that you care about in life. And when I think back to when I was like at school, for instance, which is a typical place where you are you're fed ideas and you're fed like a narrative and told this is what you should do, this is how you should live your life. That was entirely the route I went down. I went to university, albeit in the United States, a little bit different, playing football, so that was something that did align with me, but I was like studying finance. I have zero interest in finance whatsoever. It's all gone in one ear and out the other, but it was what the people in my circle were doing. So I was influenced by them, and that was my decision to do finance was purely based on it's what I thought I should be doing, it's what school and my friends had all convinced me was the thing to do. And after graduating and then stepping into the workforce and working an office job and again doing the things that society tells you, this is what you should do, this is the things that you do to lead a good life or whatever. After doing that and stepping into that workforce and working for maybe I think 2 years, it became pretty clear to me that I was living a very unfulfilled life and feeling pretty internally conflicted and thinking like I'm doing the thing but this just does not feel good to me. And I guess I'm in a fortunate enough position whereby I was able to step away from that and step into this career. But yeah, for me it was just a no-brainer, to be honest. I just couldn't, as much as society might have told me that this is the path that I should be on, and as much as there was friction at the point where I had to make a decision around do I continue doing what I'm doing or do I step into a different career field, into something that may be more aligned with who I am as an individual, and just so happens that it is much further aligned. That was a difficult moment for sure, because I felt like I was going against what I had been told was the right thing for my whole life, and that it creates a lot of inner conflict and a lot of internal challenge. But I think also in that moment what I realised is like, nobody else is really that concerned with me and my life. Obviously my parents and my close friends, but for the most part, people are much more wrapped up in their own heads about their own lives. So I think the thing that can really hold us back in making those sort of decisions sometimes can be, I wonder what everybody else will think about me if I make this decision, if I make this career move or whatever. It's like, they're not really going to think that much about you. They're more concerned with their own stuff. And I think that was one of the things that helped me push through that little bit of challenge and make the decision.
It's funny with the education thing, isn't it? Because it always feels like when I look back now, it's not about helping you realise your potential, it's making you a worker bee, so fit into this societal system, rather than actually really teaching people how to learn and consume information, understand what their passion is, understand what they'd love to do. I use sort of friends that I think about as obvious things all the time in terms of they've managed to find a career they're super passionate about, but they were told at school that they couldn't make any money like that, and it's going to do this thing. As one of my friends who's a tattoo artist, and I use him quite a lot as an example because I think it's an obvious one where he was always passionate and great at art, and he ended up being a mechanic. He fucking hated being a mechanic, and actually he's quite open about how down it got him. And I remember listening to some Jordan Peterson and stuff about creative people and what you can do to them when you push them into a very confined space like that. And he's now become a tattoo artist, and so he's doing what he loves and able to make a career out of it. And sometimes with the education system you find, well, rather than helping people to learn and think and realise their potential, it's not very good for that. And it sounds like you had that experience as well, where you sort of forced into a thing that was never going to fulfil you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't like I had a negative experience, but it just would have been, I think, a far more positive experience if the questions were asked at an earlier age. What do you actually enjoy?
Yeah.
What actually makes you feel good, and what sort of career path or role would allow you to feel like you're living in alignment with what you really care about and what you really enjoy. I think that's just it's a pretty basic, fundamental question. Not that it's easy to find the answer to that thing, but it's a pretty obvious question to ask yourself. What do you like doing?
What's your question, isn't it? I like your question where it's when were you at your happiest? That's a question you ask a lot, isn't it, to clients? And actually I think it's a really good question. It's a clever question because I don't think it's one people think enough of. And have you had really good results with that in terms of realisation for people?
Yeah, or just maybe alongside that question is, when were you at your best?
Yeah.
When did you feel like life was at the best, and what was going on in your life? And at the moment, you talk about sort of school days. At the moment, I'm studying a bit about the adolescent's brain and the neuroscience, and some of the neuroscience gets really simplified. And actually, for healthy development of the brain, it's trying to follow those passions and those things that you have an interest in. And when kids and adolescents aren't able to find those things, how that knocks onto adulthood, and they're on the wrong career paths, or their life doesn't feel like it has any meaning and fulfilment. this actually affects how the brain wires as well. So it's fascinating. I won't bore people with the neuroscience of it today, but it really interests me. I can hear that coming out from you today. It's never too late to navigate that.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it?
You know, most people listening to this are probably past that stage of life, but actually, as adults, we probably need to navigate. I talk a lot about purpose, understanding what you really want, and going back to what you were able to do there, Christian. You were able to be in a kind of career path that didn't give you that sense of fulfillment, didn't give you that sense of meaning, and you were like, you listened to yourself, you listened to how that made you feel, and then you adapted accordingly. Now that adaptation wasn't easy, by the sounds of it, it was quite fucking difficult, but you're able to do that because you spent the time and you got the space and you had the awareness. And what I'm really interested in is how you're able to have pretty good awareness at quite a young age. If I think about myself, my self-awareness when I was younger was fuck all. You know, probably even at your age. So I'm quite curious and kind of where that self-awareness kind of come from and how you sort of develop that at quite a young age, actually.
Yeah. I would have been I would have graduated university, I think 21, and that's when I started working. I was working in sales initially, and it's hard to say, okay, it was this thing that led to me becoming a more aware, self-aware person. For sure, there would have been just, I guess, experiences in earlier life that made me and shaped me into the person I am. I think I was always someone who was quite curious and quite sensitive. I'd say some of the main events that caused me to start looking inwards a little bit more heavily would be, first of all, I think going through breakup, just relationship breakup, and having, and just suffering through that experience, and just having a lot of emotions come up, and realizing that, you know what, okay, I don't want to experience that again, so what can I do to ensure that I don't have the same outcomes moving forward? That for me was like a natural prompt to go, okay, right, you didn't like that, it's time to start looking inwards and seeing what how did you act and how can you change that moving forward to avoid repeating the same mistake. So that was definitely a big teacher. And I think also, again, suffering. So I was working a sales job, making cold calls, 100 cold calls a day. And I would walk into work and be like, this is just not it. I'm not looking forward to my day today. And I'd get on the train home and just sort of feel like, okay, I've got more of that again tomorrow. And my response to that, being in that situation, rather than it be, you know what, I'm gonna just go home and just numb out, watch Netflix, and allow the cycle to repeat itself, I thought, you know what, I don't like this, so it's probably the natural thing is to start looking at what I can do differently to get a different outcome. You know, if you repeat the same behaviours, you're only going to get the same outcomes. So for me, in that moment, I think I'd started journaling, so writing down what I felt and what I was experiencing in that moment in time. And I think, to be fair, I was also smoking weed, like a good amount at that phase of my life. And my relationship with weed has often been one that it makes me go inwards. It makes me introspection. I'm not saying that's going to be the case for everyone. I'm not advocating the use of it.
No. So basically, everyone listening, go and get stoned.
It's interesting. It's interesting when
yeah.
people have these experiences, and maybe there's some real positives in terms of realisation.
We spoke about it before, haven't we?
Yeah.
It's interesting you talk about psychedelics earlier, weren't you, as well? It's just a similar example, isn't it, of giving this different experience and how your brain and your mind can think about things differently. And it's something that I'm really interested in sort of learning more about, actually, from a kind of a psychological and neurological perspective. I think we're going to continue to learn a lot about science and about this sort of stuff, actually.
Make a good podcast.
Yeah, a podcast on drugs.
Yeah. Well, that'd be a cracking podcast.
Yeah.
I was going to... it was interesting, and I want to come back to what you're talking about there in terms of the weed, because a lot of the stuff you were saying, sort of after the relationship breakdown, it was natural for you to look inside and understand you don't want to go through this again, and the monotonous of a job you didn't enjoy, and how easy it is to come home, you do Netflix, go to work the next day, you get to the weekend, it's like you just want to blot out the next week, so you just get smashed all weekend. Then you get to Sunday afternoon, and then you just dread the next day. And it was natural for you to think, right, I'm not happy with this, I need to make some changes. I think for a lot of people, that isn't natural though. They just get caught in that for 30, 40 years, where they hate everything, but they're completely unaware that they're just living for the weekend to just get smashed up and then dread the week. And So would you say actually that with the weed side of things, because it's interesting, was that something that really did give you the ability to look inside and really question things?
I think so. Yeah.
That's
I think it was something that has, and it continues to. I don't smoke a great deal these days, but it causes me to slow down. Like I literally feel like my whole body just go, take a deep breath, it's okay.
Yeah.
And to start to like just look inwards and like question my thoughts a little bit more and just delve into how I'm really feeling, rather than just being drawn to different different stimuli, different things that are in my environment perhaps, and just being led, again, externally led rather than looking inwards. So I think it has been very beneficial. But at the same time, it can take you too far in that direction, and it can become just another thing that you choose to numb yourself with.
Yes.
So I think it's one thing to use it to gain awareness, but it's another thing to then go, okay, I'm going to act on this awareness as well, because awareness is really just like the first step, I think, to creating that change.
Yeah.
So, but it had a positive impact at that stage of my life, I think.
These are like coping mechanisms, aren't they? And when we go through difficult, painful times in life, we're going to have these different types of coping mechanisms, and some of them can be really helpful, some of them can be quite hurtful, or as you say, the same thing could be helpful or hurtful depending on how you use it. So it's definitely not simple, it's definitely not black and white.
It's attaching the good or bad to it, isn't it? It just is what it is.
It's what it is, and then we've got to expand on, like with your clients or with yourself, how is this helping me? Is it helping me? What are the trade-offs to it as well? Yeah. These things aren't, definitely not black and white. But kind of what I'm hearing there is almost the benefit of going through some pain and suffering and difficulties. And I can relate to the relationship side of things as well, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this can as well. It is difficult, it is emotional, it is hard, and when you're really going through intense emotions, you are probably thinking, this whole situation I would like to avoid, and it seems to me like you've gone on having previous conversations with you, like you've gone on this kind of continued journey of personal growth and development to I suppose, if you agree with this, but to become a kind of a better, more rounded individual, so when you do have someone in your life, you attract that right type of person. I generally think, especially in the relationship context, the better the person you are, the better, and in friendships, the better person you are, you attract those types of people. When people go, I'm just surrounded by fucking idiots, you're like, there might be a reason for that, and you might have to look at yourself rather than just blame the people around you. What do you think on that?
Absolutely. I think you 100% you attract what you put out. And I just think, for me, like as being someone who's been involved in sports, playing football for basically my entire life up until last year, like I've always been someone who's been pretty like driven just to be a better version of myself in any way, shape or form, whether that be athletically, intellectually, or just relationship wise, in any capacity. I'm someone who I'm conscious about sort of pushing and seeing sort of where the edges of my potential really lie. And so, for me, like going through that suffering has, as difficult as it has been in different moments, ultimately I'm so grateful for it. Like I'm so grateful to have had those experiences, because they really shaped me for the better. And I think oftentimes that's like, the people who are the most successful in life have been through some suffering. That typically is like the precursor to them becoming great or becoming, highly influential. So, and when I say that also, I think it's important I recognise that and point out that there's been lots of people along my sort of journey, my life, who have also been influential. And sometimes it's people that I know, but other times it's been people that I've listened to. You mentioned Jordan Peterson earlier. He's been someone that I listened to quite a lot of, I think, in that phase of my life where I was a little bit lost in figuring out what I wanted to do career-wise. And then delving into like philosophy and different spiritual teachers they've all sort of culminated and come together to help me, I suppose, reframe the difficult situations that I've been through in life, and just develop my all-round awareness and help me move forward. So
sometimes with those people, isn't it, they can be there at a certain point. Like let's just say Jordan Peterson, because it's someone we've got in common, and it's not that you're always going to listen to them or they're always right about everything, but there might just be a moment where actually the message they're giving is really helpful for you to understand something, and then you move on. You might delve back into a little bit of their work. But I've spoken about it on the podcast before in terms of the way I think with like Joe Rogan's podcast, less so now, since he went to Spotify, funnily enough. I listened to it less, but it was when Graham Hancock was on, and just his whole philosophy around not even... Have you listened to Graham Hancock stuff?
I've seen his name pop up.
Yeah.
Listen to it.
It's just he studied a lot about history and actually has some different narratives around history based on his own evidence. But one of the things which we've spoken about in the podcast before is less what he's saying and more just the way he thinks and how he's open-minded, and he's happy to correct. His narrative is built on the evidence that he's found. He's happy to go against the grain, and I think actually that's a really good way of thinking. And some of the stuff that like Joe Rogan on his podcast just opened my mind up to the fact that I don't care whether these people are right or wrong, these alternative thinkers. It's just there is an alternative way out there, and to think differently and to be critical in your thinking. But also I think it's important these people come in and you can take something from them and move away. I mean, you've read a lot of books, haven't you, around because I know you've recommended a few books to the guys in the studio. What's your like favourite book in terms of if you're in a space where you need to calm down or just reset yourself? Have you got a couple of favourite books that you really recommend?
Yeah, there's a couple of books. One book that had a really had a really big impact on me was when I was, again, I think working my sales job, was the book Ikigai. I don't know if you guys have heard of that.
Right.
Ikigai, I think the word itself is a Japanese word, and it's essentially about finding like a vocation, a job that you can do that I think has to fit 4 criteria. It's like a combination of what you love, what you can get paid for, what can like help people, and there's one other thing I can't think of what it is off the top of my head, but it was just it was a really nice way of like just thinking about how you want to show up in the world and the sort of thing that you want to do moving forward. And also I think they also it's also based around Okinawa. So the book is, I think, 2 researchers who went to Okinawa, this place where there's people, lots of like super centenarians, people who live 100+ years and have very high quality of life as well. And they just sort of went there and they just looked at and just studied and spent time with the population and tried to figure out what is it about these people that causes them to live for so long and to live such happy, fulfilled lives. And they just sort of like worked out some of the main factors, one of the main things being like quality of relationships, for instance. So that's a really cool book. And then there's 2 others that are more, I suppose, they're all personal development, they're all centered on the self, but 2 that are a little bit more, I don't know how to say it, they just help me more spiritual. One would be The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer.
Just started reading that actually.
Oh really?
Yeah, when you say that, yeah, literally a few chapters in, it's
Really?
interesting about consciousness and stuff like that, yeah.
What put you onto that?
Probably maybe conversations that we've had, because it came up as when like seeds planted, you might have mentioned it a while ago,
Right.
I saw it come up and thought, I'm going to give that a little go.
Yeah.
It's a bit different, so it's interesting just to open your mind to, I mean it's on a similar wavelength to stuff that I've read before, but it's interesting you say that, because I'm just a few chapters in, so it's nice to...
It was one you recommended to Ryan, wasn't it?
Yeah, I recommended it to Ryan, I think he enjoyed it, he likes Michael Singer quite a lot, he's got a lot of podcasts as well. And the other one that I listened to on Audible during lockdown was The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, which is all about just stepping into the present moment more, which is it sounds like a pretty like obvious kind of comment to make, but the way in which he phrases it, I remember having a few moments whilst listening to it, it was like light bulb moments where something just suddenly just makes sense. And you might have heard the message before, but maybe it didn't sort of pass through, but in that moment, the way in which he said it, just like it clicked. I was like, oh wow. And it just completely sort of reframed the way I viewed the world, which is really interesting.
That's amazing when you have those moments, isn't it? When you read something, you're like, oh, fucking hell, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
But it's that constant education, isn't it? And it's kind of going back to what you were saying earlier about kind of, I think football being a big thing to push you, drive you, want to get better, want to improve. Obviously you play to a semi-professional standard, so a very good standard of football there. And it seemed like you carried that over and knocked that attitude onto other areas of life as well, and there's this kind of constant growth and development. Do you think there's something I've reflected on a little bit as well, do you think there's a trade-off to constantly pushing, wanting to be better, wanting to grow, wanting to be better in relationships, wanting to learn more, wanting to be more physically capable? Do you think that kind of, that there's a downside to that, there's trade-offs to that? You mentioned the word sacrifices earlier, I'm interested if that kind of comes to mind at all.
Yeah, I think that's something that is like, it's a bit of a tug of war. It's like the desire to be better, and then on the other hand you've got like just being content with where you're at and just being good. Because I think ultimately, like, you can look at like some of the most successful people with people that we sort of deem as successful in our society, who have maybe, like, you know, they've strived to be the best in their field and they've won a lot of stuff and they've achieved these accolades, and then it's like, okay, but like, how often were you happy? How often did you really like step into that present moment and really be okay with where you're at? I think it's a real tough sort of balance to try and strike. I think really the way to do it is maybe like to have the moments where you do push and you do strive to be better, but then also to, in other moments, recognise it's okay to slow down and just sort of appreciate where you're at and be okay with that. Again, coming back to like what I was saying earlier, like I don't think we're just here just to push and to do more and be more, but ultimately that is like what I think has been like ingrained in me from like a fairly young age, is like, you know, be the best, be competitive, strive to be better, because got validation for it, you know, whether it be sporting wise or academics wise. You do well, get validation, it pushes you to keep on doing the thing, and that's great because it might be for like really positive, beneficial reasons, but also it can mean that then perhaps you have like I don't know, you can feel like your self-worth is contingent on you doing, rather than just your self-worth is there.
And you're always looking for external validation rather than internal validation, understanding what you want.
Yeah. I think the word you bring up is content.
Oh, so that's one word I picked up on as well.
The word content comes to me like...
I wrote that down as well, mate. It's just there,
You're thinking, right, mate, this podcast for a year together, mate. Making just starting to wire together. It's such again, another difficult thing is to be still and really content for... And alongside contentment, I think of the word gratitude as well. Like content and grateful for what you have and what you've got, rather than always push and always grow. I'm a big fan of growth myself and challenging myself, but yeah, to be still and content, that's a skill, I think, actually. Especially in today's society, as you guys have just brought up there, you're not getting validated in your contentment, you're getting validated by doing something and pushing yourself, and someone going, oh, you're really good at that, I'll keep pushing there. So it's a bit of a wrestling act, as you're saying there.
Well, to bring it to PT as well, I think sometimes we can be guilty as PTs with clients as to feel our value is from them progressing, right? You're losing weight, you're getting stronger, your pain's reducing, whatever it is, whatever their goal is. And one of the things I've started to have conversations with clients about is not to put that pressure on yourself. I had one this morning, one of my clients. I was like, be content. She's done really, really well, but she's pressurising herself to go further. It's like, you've done brilliantly. You're doing really well. You're rocking up to the gym every week, twice a week. You love it. You enjoy it. You feel better for having come. Let's just train. That pressure was coming from this need to be progressing all the time. But it's like, you're doing well. Let's just be content and let's just train. So it's actually a conversation I'm now having with clients. And whether that's come from them, and certainly at times it would have come from me, where I'm seeing the only value I can give to you as a client is you progressing in some way. But actually, is there, as you just said, Christian, is there a time for us to push? And is there a time for us to be like, look, you're still getting value out of training, even if we're not specifically pushing towards something. And I think actually to bring it in sort of into the PT world, I think that's important for maybe us as trainers to know is, well, what does the client want? What does success look like for the client? And do we need to be constantly pushing them? Because if that's the only value you're bringing them, at the point in which they've achieved that goal, then there may be no more value for you. But there's so much more we can offer as coaches. And so I want to come into the conversation now in terms of the way you coach. How would you describe yourself as a trainer coach? What would you say your style is?
I think I'm someone who is...
By the way, just real quick, are you cold? Are you alright?
I'm good.
To put the heat on, I'm just going to grab a top. Are you alright?
Fine.
You're always fucking alright, aren't you?
I've got more body fat than you, Dan.
Yeah, I have to put my top on. I didn't want to chuck the heating on. If anyone gets cold, let me know.
How would I describe myself as a coach? I think I'm, I'd say, fairly adaptable. I think when it comes to working with different people, I think I can do a good job at sort of working out how to communicate with them, how to like approach the session, how to structure it in a way that's going to be ultimately meeting their wants and needs.
Yeah.
I'm not the sort of coach who's like there like barking orders and yelling at them and like trying to just like be super. I'm not necessarily demanding, but I try not to make it about myself ultimately. I try to recognise, okay, this is where you're at, this is what you want out of the experience, here's how I can like facilitate that. I think that's probably the main thing. And I ultimately with a lot of my clients as well, I really value and like to get into the deeper stuff and try to understand them as a human being, and just to make sure that they feel that they can come to me and just be able to express themselves authentically and not feel like they're being like judged or...
I think on the depth side, that's a really interesting point that you make, because obviously you've gone deeper yourself, so I think you're able to have more deeper conversations because you're on that level, first of all. Would you agree there?
I think so, yeah.
So you have to be at a certain level yourself, and obviously now you're having those deeper conversations which seem to give you a lot of personal fulfilment and value from what I hear from you. What have you learned through having those deeper conversations with the clients, and how's that impacted you?
What have I learned from that?
It's a big question, that one.
I think one of the things that comes to mind is that every single person that you interact with or that you see outside of PT sessions as well, everybody comes with a story. Everybody has their own stuff going on in their lives, and it's very easy to, before, like just from the outside, to make snap judgments or assumptions about a certain person. And I think in having the sort of interactions that I've had with some of my clients and people in my life, it's helped me come to greater terms with that, and to really, I think, as a result, develop greater empathy for everybody that I interact with. That's been one of the big things. I'm trying to think if anything else comes to mind with regards to that.
I think just to go on that, I think that's such an important point though as well with coaching. So if you're a good coach and you're interested in people and you want to get to know people, that in itself enables you to grow as a person.
Yeah.
Like I've grown since being more interested in that side of coaching through just wanting to listen and absorb information from people. And one of the things that's been really good for me is to respect other people's perspectives, even if I disagree. And so because you've got this client who's able to give you the background to what they're thinking, it's like, I get your perspective, I can see it through your eyes, which has enabled me to grow as a person. The reason that I asked the question, and James has obviously probably seen you coaching, I don't know if you have actually, but you get into those deep conversations, and is that something that you think that will always be part of your style, will always be wanting to get to know people?
Yeah, I think so. Because I think it's just like, it's so fundamental, and ultimately, like from a selfish perspective, I don't know how, if I could have 5 or 6 sessions where all we talk about is like superficial stuff. I think personally I would find that a little bit like, I could maybe do it for a day, for a week, but after a while I'm like, I need to get into some real stuff here. Like I need it for my own personal reasons.
Fucking hell.
But it's key, actually, because it's giving you, and I can totally relate to that. It gives you so much more kind of like fulfillment. Again, it's a word we keep using today, but when you're having those deeper conversations, I walk away going, that was really impactful.
Yeah.
Like for my client, for me, I walk away feeling so much better than just talking about just exercise or just calories. Now that's part of the job, but you're talking about sort of understanding people's stories, and use the word empathy there as well. And people's stories are complex. And you're right in how we make those initial assumptions. We all do it. We meet someone, we see something from a surface level, and we do judge, and then we make a lot of assumptions. And through probably being better at asking questions, being a bit calmer, I have found actually being a bit calmer as a coach, being a bit still, and just actually fully immersing myself in the client experience and what they're saying. Not only am I able to have deeper conversations, I'm able to understand and empathise more. We're able to connect more, and all of these little assumptions that I was initially making, I'm well out. Once I start to understand more about their struggles, their relationships, their past, their previous experiences, and that's a process that takes time, I get so much more value out of it, and I feel like my clients do as well, and I think that's what you're saying there.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big things that we overlook sometimes as PTs, is like the value that actually just like building strong connection with our clients can have. That can be one of the biggest reasons what makes them keep on showing up each week, because they feel like they're going to come and see you, they're going to connect, they're going to be able to like actually express themselves authentically and not have to like put up this facade that perhaps they'd have to put up when they're at home or when they're at work. They can just come in and be their authentic self and not feel like they're being judged, or they're having to just pretend to be someone they're not. That's what I think we all really want, is to be able to like actually express ourselves properly. So that's such a big thing.
I think we want that, but I think we struggle to do that as an industry. I don't think we're particularly good at it. I think when I was younger, I wasn't particularly good at it. And I think also being on the other side of things, someone who's done therapy, sometimes it's hard to open up as well. Sometimes it's really hard to, you're in a gym or you're in a studio. Yeah, these things are difficult. I'm curious, as a coach now, how you go about trying to create, because you mentioned environment at the beginning of our chat today, how you go about creating a more optimal environment for you. Well, you said that for yourself earlier, but now for your clients, so they can feel more relaxed, they can feel like they're in a safer space. You were safe earlier as well, didn't you?
Yeah.
How do you go about trying to create that safety and security now?
Yeah, that's a very valid point, because I think ultimately, if in order for you to be able to ask perhaps personal questions and to go into some deeper stuff, that the other person that you're talking to has to feel like they trust you and that they're safe in a safe environment. I think this is where, and you mentioned just a moment ago, this is where first of all, like, getting to know yourself is so important, and doing the work to ask yourself perhaps like difficult questions and start to work through some of your own insecurities or your own perceived inadequacies, and really going to town and figuring that stuff out, because then it means once you become, I think, more okay with that stuff, it then doesn't become something that perhaps you hold back from expressing. And I think one of the things that I've learned from working with clients over the last 3 years now is the more that I can just showcase my sort of humanity and the stuff that I find challenging, the stuff that I'm struggling with, the more that I open up to my clients, the more they're willing to then reciprocate that. That's not to say I have to, bring all of the stuff that I'm going through and make it like an hour about me and my problems and be super self-indulgent. But, if I can showcase that, I'm not like this perfect human being. And I think oftentimes what can happen is as personal trainers, we sort of maybe get put on a pedestal a little bit by our clients perhaps, and they view us as like this person who's got it all figured out. When you, I think, approach them with a little bit more humanness and say, look, I'm going through some stuff as well, it then gives them the permission to go, oh, okay, right, so you're going through, now I can talk about what I'm struggling with. And then that it creates, again, a level of connection, a level of like, okay, we're two human beings just trying to figure it out, and then we can go from there. So I think that's been one of the big things that I've just learned over the last few years, is just being more open and expressing the stuff that I find challenging.
Do you think a part of that as well is the fact that you've got better at acknowledging and understanding some uncomfortable emotions yourself, within yourself? Because I think once you're more emotionally aware and more able to manage and cope with your own emotions better, you're able to cope with other people's emotions better. Because if you're building depth and connection and asking some of these deep questions, emotions are going to come up. There might be some triggers, there might be some defences, there can be a whole host of array of emotions you might have to deal with as a coach. Do you feel that the more emotionally aware you've become better at managing and coping when other people are emotional? Is that something you can relate to?
Yeah, 100%. I think becoming more in tune with the things that you find a little bit triggering or upsetting is super important. I think as an example, so for me, as a male, expressing emotion has been something that I was not necessarily that wasn't showcased to me growing up, and it wasn't something that I found to be particularly natural or easy to do. And I think over the last few years, it's something that I've started to work on and to become more comfortable with. And so I can remember an example where I was with one of my clients, and we were just walking down to the studio ahead of one of our sessions maybe, and we got talking about crying, the last time that I cried, for instance. And in that moment, and this was maybe a year and a half ago, in that moment I found it quite challenging to express the fact that I'd cried I don't know, a couple of weeks prior, watching, I think it was a Will Smith documentary on YouTube, really good, and it was damn emotive, so I cried. But in that moment, there was a little bit of resistance. I told her, but there was a little bit of resistance within me to really to expressing that. And then since then, I've become just, I guess, more accepting of the fact that it's okay, and it's actually a very good thing as a human being to express sadness, grief, whatever it might be. And in me learning that and coming more into touch with the reality that it's okay to express that emotion, it has then meant that now I can more comfortably hold a conversation with somebody else and ask them, like, when's the last time you cried, and and what was it about, and how did you feel in that situation? Because I know that I've sort of tackled it within myself, and I've removed that fear of perhaps what I guess other people perceive of me when I talk about that thing.
You know? Yeah, I think it's a really valuable point, that, isn't it? Becoming more emotionally aware and capable yourself, and you were kind of alluding to being open to all the emotions, and some of us will be better at coping with or expressing certain emotions more than others. So for me, I was happy to express kind of anger and aggression as a kid, sadness or being upset. I would have parked and buried that and suppressed that. So as we talk about like health and well-being, there's a big emotional element to health and well-being that we're still learning a lot about, still navigating, and probably still struggling with really as a society. And I think we're maybe moving the needle forward from what I see through my lens, but that's only one perspective. But I do think becoming more emotionally aware is a skill. And something that now I've mentioned on this podcast that I've definitely struggled with throughout the years is, how do I cope with my emotions, and how can I get better at coping with my emotions? And I'm going to bring it back to the suffering side of things as well. You look back and you talk about your suffering and your pain with gratitude and like really being thankful for that. I think one part of that is when you're really in a dark place in your life, you're going to have to go through some fucking uncomfortable emotions. That is an amazing opportunity to learn about yourself, how you cope, how resilient you are, how you manage difficult conversations, your own emotions. So there is so much gratitude that can come along with pain and suffering, and one element of that is definitely the emotional piece, I find.
Yeah, 100%. I think when people think of gratitude, it's very easy just to think of like being grateful for all the good things, like, oh, I'm so grateful for my dog or for my relationship or for the job I've got, whatever. Like, that stuff is all worth being grateful for, but I think also be grateful for the stuff that's actually not so good. Can you find something within what you perceive to be a negative experience to be grateful for? Because the sooner that you can express gratitude for that thing, the sooner it then turns into a more positive experience given time. I think it's like Mark Manson in the book, what's his...
So I'm not giving a fuck?
Yeah.
My favourite.
Don't say Mark Manson, that'll get excitable.
That's one of... It's a great book.
The movie's just come out as well.
Oh really?
Yeah.
The movie?
It's got the movie, Subtle Art movie, yeah.
Oh shit, I didn't know that.
Straight on that. But, yeah.
It's a really damn good book, and one of the
Very
things he
good
said in
book,
that is
yeah.
like paradoxically, like negative experience is actually positive experience. That thing,
Yeah.
you know, something that on the surface level seems negative and in the moment seems negative. Give it a bit of time, it's a positive thing.
Yeah, he's sort of saying in the book as well that the constant search for positive experiences can in turn be negative.
Yeah.
Constant like, I must have positive. And if I feel like I learn more through the negative shit in life than I learn the positive stuff. The positive stuff's great, and I like to embrace and connect with positives. But from a learning opportunities, it's come from my failures, it's come from my most difficult times, my most painful times that I've suffered the most in life. I've learned so much more about myself. There's been so much more personal growth, and I've changed so much because of the difficult times. The good times have been great, but I haven't learned as much. I've just enjoyed those things. Yeah. But the learning comes from the difficulties, and I definitely see it as an advantage in life. And you mentioned earlier about success and successful people and how they've probably gone through some difficult situations. What I'm interested in though is like, what is success to you? Like, what does that really look like?
I think to bring it back to the word or a term that I used earlier, like inner peace is a big one. I think feeling at peace internally, feeling content, like we're saying. So I think ultimately that is like the big thing that so many of us are like the feeling that we're trying to chase is just a feeling of contentment, to feel like we're at peace where we're at right now. So I think that would be one aspect of success for me. And I guess it would also be living a life of alignment, and that means living or acting in line with the things that I deem to be important, pairing up my values with my actions, with my behaviours. So for me, I really value connection. So if I'm first of all, I'm doing a job that enables me that experience, but also if I'm taking time in my free time to be with people who I really connect with on a deeper level, that to me is like one metric, one box of success ticked. Another thing for me would be sort of expansion, growth, feeling like I'm growing as a human being, like I'm developing, becoming more self-aware. That for me is another thing that I value quite highly. And so if I'm embodying behaviours that are pushing me in that direction, then again I'm like, right, successful, box ticked. So yeah, inner peace, connection, self-growth, expansion, and then maybe I guess like experience as well, travelling and exploring, and that sort of ties in again with expansion and with self-development. I think it goes hand in hand quite nicely. So those things would be like on a more like broad level my interpretation of success. But of course I also want to be like successful from a business perspective. I want to be able to have a positive impact on the lives of others. I want to be able to feel like I am financially in a place where I can spend the money to do the things that I just outlined there. So it's like have the disposable income so that I can have experiences with my friends and make a meaningful connection, that I can do things that are going to help me enhance and develop my own inner awareness and inner peace and self-growth, and to be able to go and to travel and explore and have different experiences. So yeah, it's multifaceted, but I think ultimately it comes down to just those main things, and yeah, not getting swept away by perhaps what the world around us tells us equates to success. It's just defining it, for myself.
It's a great answer for success, but in order to find that answer, the amount of work you've had to do on yourself and look internally. Because I think so many people, when you say success to them, they think about that traditional finance, car, house, 5-star holidays. A lot of people will say that, and it's probably because they haven't applied enough thought. So really, I suppose one of the actions I'm picking up is the fact that actually learn more about yourself first. Before you can define what success is going to look like for you, you've got to understand yourself better before you can even ask yourself that question, really. So in terms of an action point, that's almost what you need to do first, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Because otherwise, how can you ask that question?
Yeah, take a moment, sit down, start to write this stuff down, ask yourself the question. Like when it comes to like all the external stuff, that's all great, but like what's the underlying feeling that you're going to get from those things, and are those things actually going to create perhaps that feeling that you're chasing? If it's just a feeling of contentment, do you need to go and build a giant business and go and stay in 5-star hotels and be driving a Ferrari, and like, do you need all those things to get to that feeling, or can you sort of just like shortcut it and find other ways to maybe get there? I don't know. There's also, I think, there's value in pushing and doing all the stuff to get to the point to go, this isn't it. This isn't what I thought I was gonna experience.
That's that journey thing, isn't it? The amount of successful people, that it was the journey that actually they enjoyed, and you get there and then everything stops, and it's not necessarily, You see it with athletes a lot, don't you?
Yeah.
We get that footballer, because obviously it's what we all watch, you watch footballer, their whole life is geared around getting to the top of football, and then one day the career's gone, and it's like, well, actually what now? What is your purpose? What means success to you? You're going to have to get to know yourself better.
It's enjoying every single step, isn't it?
Yeah.
We'll bring it back into what Dan was saying earlier about almost being really busy with PT.
Yeah.
You almost need to be, this is why I'm a big fan of different experiences in life, and whether you've created that for yourself or life's throwing them at you, when you're in different situations, the extreme, maybe you've been in a place where business has been really quiet and you've been struggling financially, or in a place where you've been really busy and overwhelmed and doing loads of sessions, you kind of learn because you've been in different sides of it, and you generally find the people who are maybe the most grounded, got the most wisdom, have had an array of experiences. They know what life feels like to be on one side, and know what life feels like to be on another side, and they find their own middle ground. And kind of what I'm hearing from you, Christian, is like really, and this is how I would define success, is, I think that's just what you're saying, is living life in line with your values. Like all the things that you said there were things that are really valuable to you, things that are really important to you. And I probably don't go a podcast without mentioning values, but it is so important to understand what you really give a shit about. And you've just said there about, all the personal growth stuff, but also sort of navigating that contentment and that peace within yourself. And as we're saying today, we don't give ourselves any time to think about it because we don't see the value in it. And like we were saying there, I think we're both saying, we've got that validation from the world to say, well, this is what success looks like, this is what success must be, your friends, your family, then we compare, rather than to have that courage and that awareness to go, actually, I'm not bothered about that stuff, this is what's really important to me. But you mentioned about emotions as well. I do think it's key to go, this is valuable, but why? What am I chasing with this value? Is it a feeling of contentment? Right, well, you've unpeeled the layers there to understand the kind of foundational emotional driver, which there always is if we dig deep enough. And you think, well, do I need to do that to meet that foundational emotional need? Because we all have these emotional needs to be met in some shape or form, but maybe we're not meeting them in the right type of way at times.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's like a lot of people can think that, for instance, if I just get a load of money, then I'll be content, then I'll be good. And it's like, well, someone could give you all the money and then put you in like a what was Harry Potter like living in the first
under the stairs,
like that one. It's like, well, you've got £1 million now or whatever, but you sat under the staircase. Are you really? Is that what you wanted? You just wanted the money. That's it. No, you wanted the feeling that, or what the money gave you, which is probably like a sense of like freedom and the ability to do what you want. So it's like, okay, can you find that in a different way without necessarily having? Because that feeling is there regardless of the external thing. That's not to say that, of course, in some people's case, like having more money would undoubtedly be very beneficial, would be very useful. But for sure, we can, I think, almost like shortcut the process a little bit and get rid of the thing that we're.
I think on the financial side, or a lot of things in life, we assume more is better. And we set these metrics and these goals for ourselves, which I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but it's healthy to question it, go, well, it is more better. And I've had conversations with trainers or clients where they're actually like, less is better, because I'm earning a little bit less, but I'm still living within my means, I'm still able to have the things. It's a bit of a tough pill to swallow, but I've got more time with my family, I've got more time with friends, I've got more time to exercise. Actually, all these other things I've got in my life, and okay, I've got a little bit less money in the bank, but actually, we talked about longevity earlier, about ageing successfully and healthily, like just chasing monetary stuff, just chasing money, is that the healthiest thing? It's good to at least question it and go, yeah, what is important? If I'm chasing it, why am I chasing it? Do I have to continually earn more? I don't know, but at least throw the question out and debate it in yourself. And if it's not really what you want, then it's sometimes a step back so you can actually live life fully in other areas. And because you said freedom with finances, some people are they're so busy chasing it, it's giving the opposite of freedom. They almost can't stop because they're almost addicted to must be more, must have more money in the bank. And I hear it all the time through clients and trainers. Nothing wrong with that, but again, I've started to reflect on, well, why? Well, what is really important to me is that going to make me really any happier? No, it's not actually. But I've been taught through my friends and family and society, this is what I need to do. This is what I should do. And it's helped me to question it.
Yeah, it's just questioning your programming, isn't it? Because we've all been programmed from early age, and it's just starting to question whether that programming is really serving you, whether you really need to continue to just let it dictate your actions and your behaviours. And I think as like in the personal training world, it is quite interesting because, like you were saying earlier, you used to work 45 hours per week. It would be very easy for a lot of personal trainers to look at someone like yourself in the past and go, oh wow, he's working 45 hours per week, I should be working 45 hours per week. And it's like, well, do you want to work 45 hours per week? Would that work, like you were saying, with like the things that you also value, your family and your relationships and all that other stuff? It's like just starting to question whether you need to be doing what everybody else is doing, or whether you need to be doing what works for you.
And I think that's what you've been great at, mate, from what I've seen anyway, is to be able to be your own person, be authentic, and be kind of clear on what is important to you. And that's a really important message from today. And you mentioned programming as well, and I think that's where kind of reading books and personal development is great, because it challenges the programming. Because I suppose your programming is based upon your previous experiences, your current environment. Well, we mentioned books last week a little bit, didn't we? And reading the book, and in this case, reading more spiritual stuff and personal development and psychology and philosophy and all those things, it really challenges your perspective, and it challenges those internal narratives that have been really ingrained in your brain and your mind for so long. Those belief systems are so strong, to break them is hard, but at least having a different conversation with a different person is nice, like yourself. And reading books, it's great for your development because you see it through a different lens. You challenge your own biases.
I suppose only if you read books that maybe sometimes contradict your own way of thinking as well.
Well, I suppose the good thing about, from what I've understood about some of the books like Christian's talking about and some stuff that I've read, it at least ask the question. And how you answer the question is based upon your mindset at the time. And that's why I like to revisit questions. Because how I answer it now, even though I'm in my late 30s, I'm sure I'll answer it a lot different in my late 40s. That's good. I'm going to change. I'm going to change my perspectives and opinions. It's just been aware of how I'm answering the question. I know we're getting deeper now, but I don't know if it's something that you'd agree with, because you can only answer the question based upon your current awareness, can't you? Well, maybe your current awareness changes, so you ask the question in a few years' time, you might get a different answer.
Yeah, that's why I think it's important to not just ask those questions once, but to regularly revisit them at different stages of your life, because ultimately, you know, we get shaped by the experiences we have, the people that we meet, the stuff we go through. So it's like, constantly checking in with yourself, reflecting and seeing if you still hold the same values as you did 6 months ago or a year ago, whether things have changed a little bit, and whether then you need to adjust what you're doing to then ensure that you're still living in close alignment. So 100%, have to keep on asking those questions.
But that word change, that is something that I struggled with. I was very ingrained as a personal trainer about doing things a certain way, had to be done like this, had to do this many sessions. My life was maybe a little bit more rigid when I was in my 20s, and as I got older into my 30s, I'm like, I've got to start changing, I've got to start adapting. I personally found that really difficult. I had to go through a transition, I had to question myself, I had to realise when I was fucking things up and not getting things right. And it's a constant work in progress, and I don't think as humans we have incredible ability to change, but I think change is still difficult and challenging at the same time. It's all really good having awareness and consciousness, but acting on that awareness is a different ballgame, isn't it?
I suppose change only really comes when sometimes, if you're not aware of it, comes from being forced to change, right? It's from being uncomfortable enough, or the consequences are severe enough that it enforces you to change, unless it comes from a self-awareness point of view. You know, if we take it back to personal training, a lot of people want to lose weight and get a bit fitter. They want to do that, they might even be aware of it, but watch it change once their health could be implicated. And now it completely changes because they're at a point where it's enforced on them, and then they have to evolve, they have to adapt, and they have to change. But I suppose one of the questions is, do we have to get to that point of discomfort or pain, or can we actually just be more aware of the things we want and still make that actionable change? Because I know if I have a client come in and just wants to lose a bit of weight, but they're not that overweight, that's a harder sometimes change behavioural point than someone who's like, I've just been to the doctor and I've got high cholesterol or something like that, and they're like, bang, we're going to make a change now. So sometimes you need enough.
Think about the relationship point that Christian brought up earlier, a fantastic one where you go through that pain and suffering, relationship breaking down. I'm sure discussions we've had is, because you've talked about it a few times with myself, is it really makes you reflect. And a lot of people, relationships are a really good example. Like, a lot of people just be kind of comfortable and not really want to go through and have those difficult conversations and not want to grow. And then when a relationship hits the struggle, and there is some pain, they're like, well, we need to sort something out now. We've parked this for a while, and these are problems that we've just suppressed, and now they're here and we have to deal with them because one person doesn't want to be with someone anymore. It's not until, what you're saying there, Dan, often as humans, we need some pain to make us change, and whether that's in relationships, whether that's with our health, you're right, it's hard to have that awareness, and then secondly, the point I was making, it's hard to act on it as well. It really is. You kind of need to be, sometimes, life to be forced, and this is where the gratitude comes in, I suppose, for me, is when I've been forced to change, I'm like, right, this has happened now, you're going to have to adapt, there's no fucking choice. Well, would I have changed and adapted if I wasn't in that situation? Maybe not, because I didn't have to. It's an interesting way to think about things.
Yeah, I think life will inevitably at some point present you with what you need to grow. Like
it is. I needed this. You needed this shit, mate.
But maybe, because you're a big believer in that, aren't you? And I think it makes perfect sense that actually this has been put your way on purpose to challenge you, to enforce you to grow, and whatever that was. I think it's a really nice way and a positive way of framing things.
It's probably better if you can avoid going through the shit and change in advance, like in the personal training example. It's probably better if you can come in advance, but you know what, I want to take care of my health, lose a bit of weight, whatever, and just being good in it, so I'm sort of future-proofing myself so that I don't have to go and have that experience where the other person goes to a doctor, gets told they've got, they've got to sort their act out, otherwise they might not have much longer to live, sort of thing. I think it's better if you can be the person who sort of, just gets ahead of the curve and tackles things in advance. But you know what? Maybe that's not everybody's path. Maybe that's not everybody's journey. Maybe some people you have to wait until you get hit by, a ton of bricks. That causes you to wake up and to crack on to do things differently.
I mean, no one's going to change if they don't want to. No one. You can't make anyone change. You've got to find that for themselves, haven't they? And you're right, I think what we're saying here is sometimes life hits something where they're just forced to change. Maybe it's a health thing, maybe it's a relationship thing, it could be anything. And they're forced to have to try and adapt. And as humans, we can adapt.
It could be a societal thing. I mean, if you look where we're fortunate enough to
you
live...
COVID earlier, didn't you?
Yeah, but if you look where we're fortunate enough to live, our lives are pretty comfortable for the majority of us. That's not meaning some people don't have their struggles, most people do. But in the grand scheme of evolution, we're living pretty comfortably at the moment. So maybe people are more resistant to change than ever because the pain's just not there. They just don't need to. There's not that enforcement. But as I really like the way you think about it there, where maybe when you need to change, life's going to throw you a ball that means, fucking hell, no, this is the time, and you haven't got much choice about it.
And life is just perpetually in flux. It is change.
Yeah.
As we're talking right now, like we're all changing. Like cells die. Like literally, I think every like 8 years, that every like all the
10% of your skeleton, roughly 10% of your skeleton is replaced every year.
Right,
Every year.
Yeah, we are literally always in change. So it's like to resist it doesn't really make much sense because it's happening anyway.
But you that said to me it was maybe a client, and I'm going to fuck this up. I'm going to paraphrase it. Basically, it was if it's talking about a man being stood in the river, and it's like if a man is stood in the river at one point, if he ever returns, it's completely different because it's not the same man and it's not the same river because the water flowing through is completely different, and the person, based on their own experience, we can talk about the biological side, but through your own experience you're going to be a different person. So even if you stood in that same spot twice, it's not the same person, it's not the same river, because as you said, everything's in constant change. Even the things we think are the same aren't. Our relationships, every time a client comes in, your relationship will slightly change with that client, or our relationships after this podcast, or as you were talking about earlier, if you've grown closer to a couple of the trainers in the last few months. It's always in development and fluctuation, isn't it? But as humans, as you've mentioned many times, we're seeking comfort, and there is something really nice about feeling content.
Yeah, security, stability, safety.
But comfort and content almost are slightly different.
This is the paradox of growth.
Yeah.
The paradox is we need some security and safety to be able to grow and push ourselves and to go through some suffering. If not, we almost don't have that right foundation. So you kind of talk about this kind of wrestling of the two. I think sometimes there's time and a place to push yourself and challenge yourself, and there's a some place to hold back and go, life is difficult right now, I've got some challenges, I need to have some empathy for myself, have some self-care to take care of myself now because I've got some difficult times, and once I'm ready to push, I can sort of push again, I suppose. It's just seeing that in the moment is really, really difficult, and seeing from the outside, we train our clients, there might be things that we want to help them with and get them to improve on, but allowing them to see that can be difficult, and this comes down to questions again, I suppose, and finding an opportunity to think about the common way we're living our lives, and the common way we're doing things, where is that going to get us in 3, 4, 5 years time? And it's quite a nice question to think, the way that we're currently doing things, what does that look like? If we look at not what we want to act like, how are we currently behaving, what are current actions like, where will that get us? What does that look like if that's compounded in 4 or 5 years time? Positive behaviours, but also negative behaviours as well. It's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, would you be happy with yourself if you kept doing what you're doing in 5 years' time?
Because then it comes from the client and the person, and they can answer that, and they might go yes, they might go no. And I'm always interested to know the answers to those questions.
Yeah, I really like as well. Just I'm sure you guys have probably spoken before, but like when you're with a client, like asking rather than just giving them the information, advice, and telling them what to do, just like asking them questions that cause them to think about the way they're doing things. Maybe it's like nutrition as a kind of easy example. It's like, what do you think you could be doing to improve your nutrition, rather than me giving them the answer. It's like, how about like I prompt you, and then you can start to figure out for yourself. Or like when you said earlier, like when's the time when you were at your best or most happy? Like just like asking that question, a really simple question. We don't tend to ask ourselves those questions. So it's nice when you have someone else who just prompts you and just says, hey,
It's quite nice to ask ourselves the question before we ask our clients, isn't it? I suppose we're thinking about growth here and a little bit about the future. what you know, because you're sort of late 20s,
26.
26, you're very mature for 26, you're far more mature than I was at 26. It's not difficult. I'm not mature now, mate. A little bit when I was your age. But I'm interested, if you were kind of like fast forward sort of 10 years now, the sort of 36-year-old Christian, what do you think he would be saying about the version of you now? What could you come to think about some of the things that he would say that you're doing well, some things that you think he might say you might want to change now? Could you kind of guess? Yeah, I don't know.
What an idiot, that kid knew nothing.
Yeah, well, yeah, maybe we will. Maybe
probably that. I don't know. Sorry, can you say the question again?
I mean, another way of asking it would be, is there anything you feel, a simpler way to answer the question rather than your future self looking at yourself? Could just be, is there anything you feel you want to change right now in your life? Or is there any developments that you think you want to put into your current way of living?
I think one of the things that I continually want to get better at is just like riding the ups and downs of personal training life and of life in general, and just being more at peace with everything that happens. And I think I've you know, as time has gone by, as I've got older, I've become more and more adept at doing that, but still there's moments where I find life challenging and I get caught up in emotions, or not as bad to get caught up in emotions, but I get caught up in like the external events and allow them to dictate how I'm feeling, perhaps a little bit too much, more than I ideally like.
Like a client dropping off or something like that?
Yeah, so like I was saying to you earlier, I had like 4 or 5 clients over the last couple of months drop off, and it's like, okay, it's not a great moment. How am I going to like respond to that? Am I going to get caught up in it, which I did a little bit, or am I going to go, okay, this is what happens, it's nothing personal, and I'm going to move through it and act accordingly in order to move forward. So it's like just learning to navigate those moments better. And I had this same thing happen to me at the start of last year as well. So it's like, okay, I've been through it before, so I think this time around I've definitely dealt with it a whole lot better than I dealt with it in the past. So continually like learning just to again not resist change. That's one of the really big things. Not resist change. Yeah, I think that's probably the main thing, I would say. And
you seem to be someone who's offering that reflective piece all the time. You're always kind of looking back and how did I cope with that? How do I want to cope with that better next time? Yeah. That seems to be a big kind of philosophy for you.
Yeah, it's for sure. I think that continuing to develop my own awareness of self and to work out, you know, to work through some of the things that, you know, I've held insecurity around, the things that I've found challenging, the things that have perhaps triggered me a little bit, and just learning to recognise where those things come from and to move beyond them. That's something that I remain committed to. Like I said earlier, I really value my own personal growth and just being more at peace. And so for me, if I can do anything that helps me to move in that direction, then I'm pretty content. While still, you know, in an ideal world, having a positive impact of the lives of those around me as well. Because, you know, the times where I feel like where I'm contributing most is when I'm having conversations with clients on a deeper level, helping them navigate something that they're perhaps struggling with in their life. Whether it be just listening and just lending an ear, that's fine. But also if I'm able to perhaps ask them the right questions or just provide a little bit of insight that perhaps gives them a different perspective, then that for me is like there's nothing more rewarding than being able to be able to have a positive impact in that way on someone's life.
So it's one of the best ways to feel good about ourselves, isn't it? Is to go and help other people and serve other people. And I suppose in our job we're very fortunate that's hopefully a role that we offer. And it's a great way to kind of bring up your own well-being, isn't it? And offer so much more fulfilment to yourself, is to offer more to other people, offer more value. And I suppose the big theme of our conversation today has been the more personal growth we've gone through, the more space we managed to create, because you can't grow without space and time, the more value we offer the world, the more we get back from the world in all of our relationships, and it just tends to sort of grow from there. And it's a real kind of key message, I think, from today.
Yeah, it's such a valid point. I think I heard on a podcast a couple of years ago, it might have been on a Modern Wisdom podcast perhaps, with a psychologist, and he said to outline the top 8 people in your life and ask yourself whether like you know what their goals and their dreams and their aspirations are, and if not, go and find them out and see how you can contribute positively towards them and towards their lives. And in doing so, that in turn is going to make you feel great. So it might be from a purely selfish perspective, but it's going to make you feel great because you're contributing to others. And I think we all within us have that desire to be of service to other people. So I think the more we can do that, it then coincidentally helps us feel more content and feel more at peace within ourselves.
I think there's no truly selfless act. Because normally when you do a selfless act, you get a good feeling from it. So, because you do, right? So if you feel you've helped someone in some way, even if in the moment what you've had to do is maybe you've had to give something up or sacrifice something, the feeling that you then get from having helped someone actually normally outweighs the sacrifice you have to do anyway. So actually you end up feeling better for it.
And everyone benefits, doesn't it? You get so much, improves your well-being. And think of the book Ikigai, was it then? Ikigai, yeah. And that's like that longevity, isn't it? Looking at that, like we talk a lot about exercise and nutrition, massively helping with longevity. But do we think about some of the characteristics those people had in their lifestyles, that sense of purpose, those roles that they have in their communities, and that sense of value they have in their communities? It's amazing how long they live, because they're really continually offering value and have a certain, what's the word I'm trying to find now, certain sort of identity with who they are and what they offer. And I think once we lose that, and we lose that self-worth, then we lose that ability to sort of drive and to feel good about ourselves, and it's a downward spiral from there. So yeah, when we start thinking about our well-being, it's a big component that I don't think we consider enough.
It's the inner peace thing, isn't it? It's like the Southern Mediterranean diets, a way of living where it's so much more around connections with family and friends, and so much more social time, which doesn't drive as much economic power as maybe the West does, but then we're all fucking chronically stressed, having heart attacks, cardiovascular disease, high cholesterol. You know, it's all a lot of those, a lack of sleep, which all link into each other. And it's like, well, you got this powerhouse of economics because everyone's always working all the time, but on an individual level, they're fucked. And then you go to the Mediterranean where it's like, actually, we're going to do our bits and bobs, but we're also going to spend lots of time eating and socialising and relaxing, and fucking hell, it'll be what it'll be. And actually, they tend to be happier, live longer, and have less health issues, isn't it?
Which is fascinating, isn't it?
It's interesting, isn't it?
It's nice to hear that sort of stuff, just to question it a little bit and to sort of think about it.
Mate, I think that's a great place to finish. Smashed an hour. It's still going?
Still going.
Camera's been off for the last hour. We did that during Wanklands, didn't we?
We did. I ran out of memory.
Stop recording an hour and 10 minutes ago. How long have we been on? An hour and 15.
Just let them waffle.
But no, Christian, really enjoyed the conversation today, which I kind of knew I would. But yeah, loads of things. We could have gone down so many paths. I've got so many questions, but really enjoyed the conversation. And I think we've covered some sort of deep stuff, which is one thing I personally wanted to get out of it. So it's met my needs.
Selfless. I had a great time.
And I hope you've enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, it's actually been a real pleasure. Yeah, I knew we'd have a good time. And yeah, thank you for bringing me on.
And before we finish, because we're fucking awful at this as well, if people want to find out more about you as a coach, where can they sort of find you?
Sure, so I've got a few different avenues. I've got my website, which is clpersonaltraining.com. Instagram, Christian Lawal, that's Christian LAWALPT. And I also have a podcast, Higher Health Podcast, which you guys have both been on.
We have. We'll share that. We'll share that on ours as well then, yeah. Fucking hell, we can share
those episodes, yeah. So if you want to hear more of these guys as well, you can hop onto my podcast on whatever streaming platform you use, Higher Health. And there you go. So that's probably the best ways to do it.
Oh, it's also selfless plug for me. You can also find them on the twpt.co.uk website as well. So Christian, mate, thank you so much for jumping on. Really appreciate that. As always for us, which we never ask people to share, like, and I want to say subscribe. Can people subscribe to us? Subscribe to us as well. Subscribe. Is that how I said that? Fucking subscribe.
Make people do it.
Fucking subscribe. And
leave a 5-star rating.
Leave a 5-star rating.
That's big.
If you want to leave it any less, just don't leave one. So 5 stars only. 5 stars only is all we accept. And as always, if you're interested in the upcoming seminars, that's on our Instagram page or on our self Instagram page as well. You know what I mean by now. Right, guys, we'll catch you next week.